all the testimony that related thereto. Then at 10:30, and precisely at 10:30, we have to start our testimony with respect to Alameda Naval Complex, and there's lots more testimony there. I know that when those people that are more concerned about one facility, and that facility's panel is finished, they'll want to leave. When you do so, please leave quietly, because we can't take 10 or even 5-minute breaks between the panels. This is unfortunate. Also, at the end of the day, we can't run over as we did yesterday, because members of the commission have to run to the airport, get on a plane, and go to San Diego. And we just simply have to be there and have committed to be there, and we're going to leave on time. So I ask your indulgence. I know it'll be difficult, but please understand that if you say things and want to participate and applaud wonderful statements, it's just going to be tearing into the time that the panel would like and the commissioners would like to ask questions. So if you can possibly remember that, we would appreciate it very much. The first panel is going to deal with Mare Island Navy Shipyard, and I have Congressman George Miller of the 7th District and Congressman Dan Hamburg from the 1st District in California. Gentlemen, you may proceed.
Mr. Chairman, my understanding was that Senator Boxer she will be making an independent statement, so we will withhold until after her presentation.
Okay. Senator,
thank you so much.
You may proceed. I apologize for that.
That's perfectly
I didn't see you on the corner of my eye.
It took me a long time to get this job, but I appreciate the fact that you eventually recognized that I did make it. I am just delighted to be here with all these good people and all my good colleagues, and I want to add my words of welcome. I know Senator Feinstein welcomed you yesterday, as did the governor, and I came all the way back from Washington last night, have to go back this afternoon, just because I wanted to be here. I wanted you to know that the Senate delegation is quite united, and my comments will not be very long. They will be broad-based. They are looking at the whole state, since I represent all the people of California. Mr. Chairman, what I told you when I saw you right before we began was that I appreciate some of the statements you've been making, which indicate to me that you're listening very, very carefully, and as are the members of this commission, to the comments that you're hearing from us here in California. I think we have a special circumstance here, and I do appreciate the fact that you're open to our comments. And I am confident that once all the information is laid before you, you will conclude that California has indeed been unfairly targeted, and that your recommendations to the President will be based upon the twin pillars of military necessity and economic common sense. Mr. Chairman, I think it's of paramount importance that this commission factor in the cumulative economic impact of proposed base closures on a state, region, or a community, combined with a consideration of the unemployment rate when determining which bases should be closed. California, as you know, has been hit especially hard, disproportionately so, by the first 2 rounds of base closure. Since 1988, a total of 17 bases in California, 17, Mr. Chairman, have been slated for closure, twice as many as in any other state. And I have a chart I want to show you. Where did I put it? Oh, here it is. Because I think that these 2 charts really say it all. We have 14% of military personnel stationed in California. Yet, in BRACs 1 and 2, in the first 2 rounds, we got hit with 60% of the personnel hit. And in BRAC 3, we get hit with 50% of the personnel hit. So you can see 14% of the personnel and getting hit with 60% in rounds 1 and 2 and 50% in this round. Thank you, Senator.
Sure.
Such a path. And the second one, again, shows the disproportionate impact in personnel cuts. California would take 55.4% of all the hits, and all other states take 44.6%. And Mr. Chairman, we are a large state, but we're not that large. We're not more than half the country. Thank you. Net military personnel reductions in California, again, will top 50%. And when Secretary Aspen removed 2 of the bases from the list, we went down to about 39% of the hit. Mr. Chairman, round 3 is not occurring in a vacuum, and it cannot be viewed in isolation, separate from the other closure decisions, as those charts point out. I believe this level of reduction is simply too much for us to absorb. And I believe we should take our fair hit. Everyone should. But this is too much for us to absorb. Sacramento's McClellan Air Force Base and the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, as I stated, were removed from the list by Secretary Aspen, and they have been put back on the list. And even so, we take almost a 40% hit. A recently released GAO report on base closures found that, quote, the standards used for DOD's cumulative impact analysis were simply not supportable. Again, I know we're going to take a hit. I'm not naive about that or foolish. I know what kind of job you have and what you must do. But please let it be fair, and if I might suggest that if a state gets hit by multiple closures, that you consider staggering or stretching out closure dates to soften the blow to affected communities. I think this is very, very important. I urge the Commission to look at the true and comprehensive costs of closing each facility. And I want to share with you a very interesting experience that Congresswoman Pelosi and I had when the Presidio was closed. We asked for a GAO report. It showed it would cost more to close it than keep it open because it had a hospital, and that was the major mission of the base. And I think you remember the fight that we put up to no avail. However, we now see signs that the 6th Army will stay at the Presidio because it makes no sense to move them to Colorado, which we pointed out at the time. Why spend so many millions of dollars to create a new facility when you've got perfectly good ones here? And I think the experience of the 6th Army, which will probably not be moved to Fort Carson, makes our point. They may move it to Moffett Field, a few miles down the road from the Presidio. Well, what was the point of going through the whole exercise to move them a few miles up the road? I think if you look at the Alameda Naval Complex or Mare Island, the facilities that are under discussion today, I think you will find a very similar argument. Enormous expenditures will be required before Everett, Washington could be considered a suitable alternative to the Alameda complex. I know you had terrific testimony on this, and I won't belabor the point, but $250 to $300 million must still be spent just to put Everett on an operational par with Alameda. Additional military construction costs in the form of housing required could easily reach $500 million. And I spoke to some retired naval officers who say, for many other reasons, the weather included, that area is just not cost effective at all. And I think that we could be looking at $1 billion having to be spent at Everett before it could begin to perform the functions that are performed at Alameda. And while operations at Mare Island would not be relocated in toto to any one facility, the Navy's 1993 cost estimate for closing Mare Island is $280 million. Mayor Tintley of Vallejo and Congressman George Miller, my friend who is now representing Vallejo, and I had the pride of representing it prior, I think they're going to show you that the cost may be closer to $1.16 billion with a payback period spread over many years. And I know that Congressman Ron Dellums will really get into the specifics of Alameda, and he knows what he's talking about. And you know that, Mr. Chairman, because you and he served as very close colleagues with different philosophies, but very good friends on the Armed Services Committee. So I think the message is clear. We must look at these closures from the standpoint of what it is really going to cost in the real world. And then there's environmental cleanup costs, Mr. Chairman. And let me tell you a quick story. Hamilton Air Force Base in my district closed 20 years ago. It still hasn't been cleaned up. It's a nightmare. We don't want to see these bases become ghost towns because our economy can't sustain it, especially here in California. So I'm going to ask that the balance of my statement be put into the record because I know that you have some very important members that you need to hear from. I just wanted you to know, as one of the 2 senators from the most beautiful and wonderful state that has boasted the California dream, We need your help, not based on pity that we have a problem here, but based on fact. Fact number one, in certain of these bases and the ones before you today, we just don't see the really clear economic argument. Fact number two, cumulative economic impact. What we're really doing here, consider the closure dates, if you will, and we look to you for your leadership and the entire commission, and I want to thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you very much, Senator. Your entire remarks will be part of the record.
Thank you.
Congressman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand that Mare Island's time will start to run at this point.
That's correct.
Thank you. Chairman Corder and Beverly Byron, my former colleagues in the House, and to members of the Commission, let me welcome you to the Bay Area. I'm Congressman George Miller, and I represent Contra Costa and Solano counties, which include Mare Island. I'm here today along with members of the Mare Island community to address the Navy's recommendations to close Mare Island Naval Shipyard. You are here in the role of independent fact finders to ensure that the base realignment and closure process is fair. You must also ensure that it will result in the best force structure for our military responsibilities and our responsibilities to the nation's taxpayers. Your difficult obligation has been complicated by the fact that much of the evidence that has been developed is under the control of one party to the issue, the Department of Defense. In addition, much of the evidence as currently presented is factually flawed. In our testimony today and in further submissions to the Commission, we will show that the Navy significantly understates Mare Island's military value due to the fact that its information contains factual errors, inconsistent information gathered through the data calls from each shipyard, and a failure to provide credit to the unique functions performed at Mare Island. The Navy has inflated the cost savings to accrue from Mare Island by almost $900 million. And the Navy has failed to adequately address Mare Island's unique functions and contributions to the United States military and national security. Here are just a few specific examples that will be supplemented and discussed in greater detail by our next panel that demonstrate this flawed analysis and cannot support the closing of Mare Island. The Navy's analysis fails to account for the ocean engineering program in the military value matrix, despite its critical and unique function. The military value matrix incorrectly credits other bases for capabilities that they do not have, such as crediting Long Beach for nuclear capability despite the fact that it has no nuclear license. It is significant that Long Beach is given credit for being able to dry dock nuclear vessels, and yet Long Beach's nuclear capacity is rated at 0. When the Navy's significant errors are corrected, the military value matrix ranks Mare Island as the Navy's third most valued shipyard after Puget Sound and Norfolk, not seventh, as the Navy has initially concluded. The Navy has listed no environmental costs in their closure analysis. The Navy has grossly understated and estimated the cost of relocating Ocean Engineering Program by at least $200 million. What is the rationale for the relocation of Ocean Engineering, one of the Navy's most important projects that accounts for approximately 20% of Mare Island's workload and by all accounts is being conducted effectively at Mare Island? In fact, Ocean Engineering was awarded 26 citations, including 3 by the President, for exemplary work. What is the rationale for closing Mare Island to reduce its capacity, only to have that capacity recreated at Puget Sound, Pearl Harbor, and Long Beach? The Navy's plan to close Mare Island is akin to current efforts at congressional reform. We reduce the number of committees, but we spend the same amount of money. For example, in addition to moving Ocean Engineering, possibly, to Bangor, Washington, the Navy has also given $10 million to Pearl Harbor for replicating Mare Island's 688 refueling dry dock at a cost that is not included in their cost-saving analysis. Furthermore, 2 months ago, Pearl Harbor requested Mare Island's blueprints for their 688 dry docks and recently requested Mare Island's engineers to assist in the plan. Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission, while it appears that the Navy has decided to close Mare Island, It has failed in all of the criteria that the Navy itself has established to justify the closing of the shipyard from both a military and a taxpayer perspective. You and your staff have now had the opportunity to see Mare Island firsthand. You have seen the tremendous amounts of recent investment in facilities and capability that makes Mare Island the most modernized naval shipyard. Some of the shops that you saw on Saturday were operating at reduced capacity. The Navy would have you believe that this supports its recommendation to close Mare Island as being a decision of cost effectiveness. However, the Navy itself determines the workload in those shops. This argument is fundamental to our critique of the Navy's capacity analysis and will be discussed in greater detail by our military witnesses. The Navy has not yet directed a single RIF at some yards, and yet at Mare Island has been downsized for the last 4 years at the cost of over 4,000 jobs. The unused shop capacity that you saw is the result of the Navy's decisions to move workload to other naval shipyards. It has no bearing on the efficiency or the excellence of work that is performed in these shops. Until the Navy can refute the critical analysis that we present to you today and will supplement in the coming weeks, I do not believe that this commission can concur in the closing of Mare Island Naval Shipyard. I do not raise these concerns as parochial debating points, but as a congressman concerned with the national security, controlling government spending, and the fair treatment of his constituents. The people of Mare Island obviously have a great deal at stake with this decision. Our communities would be devastated by the closing of this shipyard. Unemployment will more than double in some parts of our region. But Mare Island workers remain extremely loyal to the shipyard and to its mission. Generations of their families have dedicated their lives to the defense of this country through employment at Mare Island. The immediate and severe dislocation that will result from the closure absolutely compels the Navy to justify its recommendations far, far beyond the incomplete and the inaccurate recommendations it has made to date. After reviewing the evidence, we do not believe that the Navy can justify the closure based upon the facts. Again, we appreciate your time and your consideration of our arguments, and I would like now to turn to my colleague from California's 1st Congressional District, Congressman Dan Hamburg.
Thank you, Congressman Miller. I want to echo to each of you present today the appreciation expressed by Senator Boxer and Congressman Miller earlier for the difficult task you have undertaken. We respect your commitment to a fair base closure process, and we depend upon your careful and objective analysis of the facts. We will provide important information at today's hearing, which will demonstrate the valuable and unique qualities of Mare Island Naval Shipyard. We hope that the testimony you will hear today and the testimony you will review in coming days will convince you that Mare Island should continue to serve the Navy with its unique and valuable capabilities. I would like to make several brief observations regarding inadequacies in the Navy's base closure process, which have unfavorably prejudiced the outcome for Mare Island. I will then provide an overview of the debilitating economic impact of the proposed closure of the shipyard on communities surrounding Mare Island. Recently, the GAO testified that the services, and particularly the Navy, had adhered overall to the DoD established criteria for making their recommendations. I submit that in their analysis of Mare Island and the other shipyards, the Navy did not consider a number of factors relating to these criteria. While it has been well established that the Navy did not seriously include environmental cost considerations as part of its deliberations, it remains one of the 8 criteria and should be factored into the consideration of each facility. More importantly, while the Navy placed paramount importance on reducing excess capacity, in doing so, it virtually ignored the operating costs of shipyards in executing their mission. Economic impact. As a shipyard with an extraordinarily high concentration of civilian employment, the closure of Mare Island would devastate our communities. We recognize that the Commission does not weight this criteria as highly as military value, but the impact of the closing of Mare Island on Vallejo, Napa, and Fairfield, and other surrounding communities will be staggering. Mare Island is the principal employer of Solano County and the fourth largest industrial complex in all of Northern California. If Mare Island were to close, a substantial percentage of the employment base of the Vallejo, Fairfield, Napa metropolitan area would be lost. The Navy estimates 11.7% of the employment base of the area would be lost, but our independent economic analysis report shows that the total direct and indirect job loss would be as high as 21%. Undoubtedly, it will hit selected fields, such as the building and construction trades, the hardest, since their unemployment figures are already at a staggering 35%. The job loss, both direct and indirect, and the multiplier effect on local economies would bring the total economic impact of closure to $500 million or more. Given our employment base, these figures are critical for the Commission to consider. We will provide more specific details later in the presentation. I want to close by thanking the Commission again. We appreciate your consideration of the information we are presenting. We know that you will do your best to represent us fairly in this matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congress. Mr. Chairman, at this point, I would like to introduce those who will make our military arguments. Mr. Bruce Christensen, who is the President of the Navy Shipyard Association, and Dennis Kelly, who is the Vice President of the Navy Shipyard Association. Bruce?
Congressman Miller, thank you. Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission, my name is Bruce Christensen. As President of the Navy Yard Association and employee at Mare Island Naval Shipyard for over 35 years, I will take a few minutes to describe how the $1.7 billion investment in the mission and the unique capabilities of Mare Island is critical to the future of the Navy. We will then discuss the specific concerns regarding the Navy's process of analysis. As a nuclear shipyard, Mare Island's primary mission is to overhaul, repair, and refuel nuclear and non-nuclear submarines as well as surface ships. Mare Island has also performed a number of availabilities remote from the shipyards, primarily in Alameda, San Diego, and Pearl Harbor. Mare Island is the planning yard for 2 home-ported ocean engineering submarines and other deep submergence vessels. Mare Island is capable of working on any ship in the fleet, including the most complex ships such as fast attack submarines, fleet ballistic missile submarines, as well as nuclear carriers and cruisers. The shipyard has undertaken an extensive management reduction and restructuring in recent years in order to become more effective and cost efficient. In fact, Mare Island was the only shipyard to have an operating profit in fiscal year 1992. 4 of the shipyards rated highest in military value by the Navy had a combined operating loss in excess of $250 million in the same year. Mare Island has performed availabilities remote from the shipyard and submarine inactivations more efficiently than any other shipyard and at lower cost. We have also performed submarine modernization work for SSN 688s with less man days than any other shipyard. As several of you saw during your visit to Mare Island, the shipyard has significant unique capabilities that must be considered in any closure recommendation. Let me describe how Mare Island's unique capabilities will support the future needs of the Navy. First of all, the Ocean Engineering Program. Mare Island provides the lead shipyard services for design, construction, and execution of the Navy's sensitive ocean engineering program. All the skills which support this important DoD program are available solely at Mare Island Naval Shipyard. As an important national security program, ocean engineering involves approximately 2,000 skilled personnel at the shipyard, will certainly be continued in the future. If Mare Island closes, ocean engineering will have to be realigned to another facility at significant cost and disruption to the Navy. Secondly, there is a new construction capability. Mare Island is the last public shipyard to have new construction capability, which was demonstrated just 2 years ago. 2 years ago, the new construction project was one where a 100-foot-long hull section was constructed and fit into a 637 class submarine, which was cut in two, then welded with the new section back together. If Mare Island closes, the Navy loses this capability forever. In recent years, this new construction capability was called upon in a unique manner. Namely, when the private shipyards were submitting bids for new construction which the Navy considered unreasonably high, Mare Island was requested to prepare a bid for construction of a Los Angeles-class submarine. After Mare Island's bid was submitted, the private shipyards reduced their bids, resulting in significant savings to the U.S. Navy. Thirdly, I will discuss the SSN 688 refueling in the Pacific Coast. Mare Island is the only shipyard on the Pacific Coast and one of only 2 shipyards in the nation possessing the infrastructure and technical capability certified by the Navy to perform refueling work on Los Angeles-class submarines. While the number of 688 class submarines will be reduced in the future, the Navy will retain its refueling capability to support the fleet, retaining the in-force structure. Additionally, the Navy must accommodate these increased deactivations as they retire the first of the class rather than refueling them as originally was planned. The ramification of not considering Mare Island's unique refueling and nuclear fuel handling capabilities and the costs associated with them are significant. I will now call on Dennis Kelly, Vice President of the Navy Yard Association, to discuss issues concerning the Department of the Navy's analysis for selecting naval shipyards to be selected for base closure.
Thank you, Bruce. Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission, in addition to my position as Vice President of the Navy Yard Association, I also have over 20 years of experience at the shipyard and currently serve as the Deputy Director of the Radiological Control Office. As you are aware, the Navy used data calls to determine the capacity in an elaborate matrix system to measure military value. They then combined this information into a final configuration analysis that had as its objective to raise the military value of the yards while at the same time reducing the excess capacity that exists. In addition, the COBRA process was used to determine the cost for closure of those bases which were targeted. Significant mistakes were made by Navy, this is the essence of our argument, in 3 important areas. And we want to briefly note what they are, what role they played, and in the final Navy recommendations for closure. First, I would like to discuss capacity issues. Maximum capacity was the single most important criteria in the Navy analysis when determining which shipyard to close. It is our opinion that one of the most questionable elements of the Navy's analysis is capacity. When held under close examination, capacity, as defined by the Navy, is a relative and an unjustifiable measure of the value of a shipyard to the United States military. The data calls which were distributed by the Navy arrived at the shipyard with inadequate instructions. Therefore, those responsible for supplying information to the Navy relied on verbal guidance from headquarters for assistance in completing the exercise. The Navy asked one question and got answers from 7 yards based on different interpretations of the parameters of the question. The question was, how much human capacity does the shipyard have for performing ship repair and overhaul? The shipyards were told to assume no limits in answering this question. How much work you could do, how much work could you do if you could hire anyone you wanted to? Naturally, a yard allowed to hire thousands of additional workers and perform work on any type of ship and at off-site facilities around the world has a high capacity. In fact, an accurate measure of Mare Island's maximum capacity could be the period during World War II when we employed over 40,000 workers. But that would be no more accurate than the capacity which the Navy has listed. In fact, Mare Island's assets are its skilled workforce, its modern equipment, its unique functions, and its plant facilities. On that score, Mare Island ranks as the Navy's 3rd most important shipyard without even considering its unique capabilities of ocean engineering, new construction, and 688 refueling capability, all of which you saw when you toured the shipyard. A shipyard's excess capacity, which is the difference between its present capacity and its potential, is wholly controlled by the Navy. We can only conclude that the Navy made the decision to close Mare Island several years ago when downsizing began at Mare Island. The question that we raise with you is whether the Navy has made the right decision for our country. The answer is emphatically no. The evidence suggests that Mare Island is the most efficient yard, performing work not currently able to be performed at other shipyards, and because it can work on any type of ship, Mare Island could absorb the workload of yards such as Long Beach and Portsmouth within its present capacity. Yet neither Long Beach nor Portsmouth can presently perform the work of Mare Island. Let me explain how this flawed approach... Yes.
Let me ask a quick question from you on your statement on the Navy's question was how much capacity does a shipyard have for performing ship repairs and overhaul? Was that question answered by the other yards in the same manner as Mare Island answered it?
We don't know. What we know is how we answered the question. The question was stated, assume normal shift structure, assume unlimited ability to hire people, and we were not limited by our facilities at the shipyard. For instance, as I'll testify later, we included a great amount of work that's not even done at Mare Island. In a recent GAO report containing an analysis of the Department of Defense's recommendations for the 1993 base closures and realignments, it notes that the measure of capacity was direct labor man days based on a single 8-hour shift. In the maximum capacity data call, Mare Island was instructed, as I just noted, to assume normal shift structure with no constraints on hiring and workload. In so doing, the shipyard produced potential capacity estimates based on 3 shifts and not 1. This misinterpretation was not caught, and the data was used in Navy's analysis for Mare Island. The significant error results in a gross inflation of Mare Island's capacity, which affected the final outcome relative to the other shipyards. Almost 30% of the capacity that was included... Yes,
just to repeat Commissioner Byron's question, the other shipyards would have responded on a 1-shift capacity basis, while you did it on 3, is that right?
What I think the Commission really needs to do is go to Navy and have Navy explain to them what data they received. What I'm trying to tell you is that the guidance that was received was so loose that your only guidance was to assume normal shift structure. We happen to know that at least one other shipyard assumed 2 shifts. Mare Island assumed 3 because the question was phrased in a text of what could you do under maximum capacity. Some ships may have had 1. I don't know.
Okay.
The significant error results, as I said, in a gross inflation in Mare Island's capacity. 30% of the work described in our data calls for Mare Island is for work which is not performed on the shipyard. This results in an overestimation of the shipyard's capacity by including work which is performed at locations such as Alameda, San Diego, and Pearl Harbor. All of this is unrelated to our physical capacity. Finally, nowhere in the capacity analysis did the Navy consider the capacity of nuclear-capable private shipyards. If this were accomplished, it would clearly show a disproportionate amount of shipyard capability on the East Coast. I'd now like to turn to the issue of the military value matrix, which we have a copy of it up here on the board. Mare Island received a low military value rating from the Navy due to the number of mistakes that were made in compiling this matrix. What you see on the board before you is just one page from that matrix. The boxes, or the yellow boxes, are all errors that have been identified in that report. There are a number of those errors. I won't go into all of them in detail. They will be provided in a written submission to the Commission. But first, I'd like to again note that nowhere in this matrix were Mare Island's unique capabilities taken into account. Ocean engineering and new construction were not considered. And you saw numerous examples when you toured the shipyard of this capability and how it fits in with the ocean engineering program. By that I mean new construction. Additionally, the Navy did not properly credit Mare Island's special mission of refueling and overhauling 688 class submarines, even though this is essentially the only type of submarine refueling and overhaul work being conducted at this time. The refueling capability at Mare Island, again, those were the large structures that you saw at our dry docks 1 and 2, some as much as 8 stories tall. They're not included in this analysis. As these are significant activities at Mare Island, their exclusion or minimal consideration has distorted the military value matrix process, producing a lower rating for Mare Island than other shipyards, given the actual activities at the yard. The omission of ocean engineering would be understandable if the program were to be discontinued. However, it remains a national defense priority, is scheduled to be replicated, and must be evaluated to fully understand the yard's capabilities. In the specific case of new construction, as has already been noted, the loss of this capacity would significantly impact the Department of Defense's flexibility in controlling cost. As was pointed out repeatedly during your tour, this capability is a fundamental part of the Navy's ocean engineering program, and it is not available at the Bangor, Washington site, which Navy has designated to relocate the ocean engineering program. Second, the Navy's military value matrix included 28 substantial errors, some of which, again, are shown here, providing credit to some shipyards more than once for capabilities in the same area, or providing credit for dry dock capabilities which do not have a meaningful operational significance. One entire section of the military value matrix, namely that regarding dry dock capabilities, which was worth approximately 1/4 of the total credit, was generated entirely by Navy, without any input from the Naval Shipyard. There were
was it wrong? Was it wrong in your opinion?
The whole, as a matter of fact, if you look at the top section there, every square that we have indicated in a box is in error. And I'll give you some examples of that. Mare Island was not given credit for being able to dry dock 2 mid-sized surface ships that would be cruisers or destroyers simultaneously. In fact, Mare Island has that capability in both our dry docks 2 and 3. All Navy needed to do was refer to a military handbook, which they issued, in order to determine that fact.
Excuse me, how was the Navy rated in that category?
I don't understand.
How was Mare Island rated in that category?
Mare Island was rated as having the capability to only dock a single cruiser or destroyer.
And therefore, what rating did it receive?
We received a lower rating and lower credit in the matrix because we should have gotten credit for being able to dry dock 2 cruisers and destroyers simultaneously. In addition, Long Beach Naval Shipyard is given credit for dry docking nuclear ships despite the fact that they have never done this and they do not have the nuclear trained personnel to support it. It's a fact. Long Beach couldn't even drain the water from the dry dock without a nuclear capable shipyard.
Do they have their certificates necessary to be able to ramp up to be?
No, they do not. They would have to call in a nuclear capable shipyard such as Mare Island to even be able to drain the water from the dry dock in dry docking a nuclear ship. The best Hunter's Point, the reason that picture is up there is because Mare Island has dry dock carriers at Hunter's Point. Started in 1985. We dry docked 3 nuclear carriers there. We've dry docked 2 nuclear cruisers there, and we received no credit for that. That's because of a Navy decision to dispose of that dry dock. But to not give us credit for that, and then to turn around and give credit to Long Beach for a capability they do not have, only illustrates how flawed this process is.
Let me ask you this question, if I may. If are you going to probably you're going to get to this, and that is your military rating was, I forgot what it was, 38 or
it's about 38. It was 7. It was the lowest.
If every error that you say occurred was corrected, what would your rating have been?
All right. Well, you're right. I was going to get to
You're going to get to it.
Well, we don't intend to go through all the mistakes because we simply don't have the time here. when we correct the errors which we found, remember, this is Mare Island looking at this thing from what we know to be true, we easily become the third most valuable shipyard. And as you can see there, the rating is up around 44. That's important because it affects the entire configuration analysis that Navy did. The thing I'd like to turn to now is the Cobra report.
Do you have a copy of that chart?
You can have that chart.
Well, I mean, you saw all the stuff I had to carry.
Now, I have.
Congressman Miller will carry it back with him on the plane.
He's big enough to carry.
I have a copy of the actual matrix, which I know is hard to read from up there, and it's our intent to provide you with a copy of all the errors.
We give it to the staff.
Soon.
Okay, it's been given to Mr. Jackson.
Mr. Kelly, none of those other yards has been corrected by you.
Right.
Have we made changes with respect to other shipyards where we saw errors? Is that your question?
Yeah.
Yes, we have.
So that reflects your changes of other yards?
That reflects changes of both other yards and at Mare Island. For instance,
Are there any other yards that you increased in military value?
Mm-hmm. No, there are not. But I'll give you, for instance, we just happen to know that Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard, located on the island of Hawaii, does not have interstate railroads and does not have interstate highway capability, yet Navy awarded them credit for that. But, you know, some of this stuff is not rocket science.
That's the transportation bill.
I'd like to turn to the Cobra report now, or the cost of closure. Following the Navy's pattern of analysis, after determining the most advantageous mix of reducing excess capacity and enhancing military value, the Navy then requested Cobra data calls for only the 2 shipyards recommended for closure and not all of the yards. This omission is a fundamental flaw because the Navy did not have an understanding of which shipyards would be most cost-effective for closure and should continue operations. They therefore could make absolutely no comparison as to the operating cost of all shipyards in determining which shipyard to close. Given the Navy's decision to recommend closing a nuclear industrial complex such as Mare Island, the cost factors would just seem prohibitive. However, the Navy's Cobra reports indicate that the one-time cost for closing Mare Island would only be $280 million. We have serious doubts about the validity of some of the numbers in the report, and therefore raise the following examples for your consideration. The Cobra did not include the cost estimates for relocating all 44 tenant commands that depend on the infrastructure and administrative services at Mare Island. Further, the Cobra report estimates that the cost for relocating Ocean Engineering to Subbase Bangor are $82 million. We believe they are much higher, closer to the $280 million, which was originally estimated by the shipyard in its submittals to Navy. When closing Mare Island, the Navy is left with the only one shipyard capable of refueling 688 class submarines and has therefore already initiated funding to replicate this capacity at Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard. Yet this cost was not included in the Cobra analysis, and it's about $30 million. The cost estimates for the RIFs, which would involve approximately 5,000 employees at Mare Island, were estimated at $2.6 million. This is low, and the inaccuracy must be corrected before the true cost of closure can be calculated. The projected cost of a 425 employee RIF this year alone are $7.6 million. A more reasonable estimate is $20 million for RIFs associated with closure. The Cobra report did not include estimates for specific closure costs associated with the shipyard's nuclear capabilities. Preliminary cost estimates for completing these jobs are in excess of $340 million. Now, what I'm talking about there is as you went through the shipyard and saw the specific nuclear facilities, all of those would have to be decontaminated and released before the shipyard can be closed. None of that is in Navy's cost estimates, and it's unique to a nuclear shipyard. Although these are just a few examples, they are important for demonstrating the lack of reliability of the Navy's documentation and ultimately the soundness of their recommendation. This chart here illustrates that the cost savings projected by the Navy are low by almost $900 million. And in fact, the cost of closure for Mare Island will be at least $1 billion. Cost and manpower implications remain an important criteria that you must consider as you evaluate which naval facilities to close. That completes my testimony, and I will now turn the presentation over to Congressman Miller.
Thank you very much, Dennis, for that presentation, to Bruce for yours. I would like to just take a moment at this point to say to you that I think it's important that we expand on 2 points that were made here with respect to the environmental cost. While we clearly recognize, and as the Navy does in this process, as the entire military does, there are ongoing environmental costs whether you close or you leave open a facility. But there are 2 things that are unique to Mare Island here that have very important costs attached to them. That is that the first one is that in February of this year, the Department of the Navy sent to the city of Vallejo and outlined to them $142 million of environmental costs that result only from the closure of this base. And also the point raised by Dennis in his testimony that this yard, because of its nuclear capabilities, and the complete closure of this yard is currently slated by the Navy, will require the decontamination of equipment and dry dock facilities. It is now conservatively estimated within the yard that will be about $340 million to do that work. So we have $480 million that shows up nowhere in the submissions made to this commission with respect to these environmental tasks that will have to be undertaken if in fact Mare Island is closed, and only undertaken if in fact Mare Island is closed. And with that, I would like now to turn to our panel on community impact, beginning with Mayor Tony Intently.
First of all, good morning. I want to thank your staff. I think you understand that this issue has a great deal of anxiety level for me and for the people I represent. And I want to thank your staff, particularly Matt Berman, for his kindnesses to us when we were in Washington. It helped assure us that we would receive a full and clear opportunity to present our case, and that is much appreciated. Mare Island is the largest employer between the East Bay and Sacramento. After you've heard what we have to say, we feel confident that you'll draw the same conclusion that we have, namely that Vallejo and its surrounding communities will not only be hurt by the closure of Mare Island, our entire economic base will be devastated. Furthermore, Vallejo is particularly proud of its historic partnership with Mare Island Naval Shipyard. We've been there for each other for 140 years. This pride is demonstrated in the city's logo, which reaffirms the city's commitment to preserve its maritime heritage. We are therefore concerned that the loss of Mare Island is more than an economic loss. It's a loss of our cultural identity. Families have been raised and children educated on salaries earned at the shipyard for 2, 3, or more generations. I think it's not too much to say that Vallejo is Mare Island. We've been proud of that there would not be much left to Vallejo without Mare Island. To speak more fully of the economic impact of Mare Island, I now introduce State Senator Mike Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to recognize Assemblywoman Valerie Brown, who's with us today and who's worked very hard in our effort that led up to today. Mr. Chairman, Commission members, and staff, I want you to know that the cumulative impacts of the proposed closure of California bases will have a devastating impact on the economic recovery of our state. The California economy is suffering through a continuing recession, and we have experienced significant employment loss during recent years. In the Bay Area, more than 100,000 jobs could be lost, with a corresponding income loss of over $3 billion. Closure of Mare Island alone will result in the loss of some 26,000 jobs. It's clear that neither the regional nor our state's economy will be able to absorb the loss of this many jobs. Much of the job loss will be in the professional, the managerial, and the trade sectors, currently experiencing unemployment ratios higher than the state's overall unemployment rate. Understandably, this will mean that many more individuals will join the unemployment lines and will be applying for not only unemployment, but other social benefits. As chairman of the State Senate's Budget Committee on Health, Human Services, and Labor, I can tell you that the cost of these social services to our state is already at an all-time high. Regrettably, so is our state's deficit. Clearly, our state will not be able to continue to provide these social services while simultaneously facing a recession. The residual effect of these closures will resonate throughout a region which has historically played an important role in stimulating economic activity in our state and our nation. While I don't believe closure of Mare Island makes sense at any time, now is a particularly onerous time to further set back our region's efforts to rebound from its economic problem and help drive our nation into prosperity. I thank you very much for your consideration.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, my name is Al Leveso. Could you pull your mic? Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, my name is Al Leveso. I'm chairman of the board of a small community bank located in South Salina County, and I'm also an attorney in South Salina County. I believe I'm qualified to speak on the local economic impacts that the closure of the shipyard will have in our community. As you have heard, it's been since 1854 the shipyard has been the heart of our community. There's no surprise, therefore, that we are almost totally dependent on the shipyard with reference to our job base and income. The chart before you illustrates on a community and county basis the fact that we will lose some 26,000 jobs, as you've heard by prior testimony. The breakdown of the workforce on the Mare Island Naval Shipyard is composed of many highly skilled and trained people. We have, as you saw on your tour, electricians, welders, pipe fitters, engineers. Unfortunately, this breakdown makes the region supporting Mare Island particularly susceptible to the effects of a base closure. By example, the city of Vallejo has only 2 private firms in a non-finance retail business area that employ 200 or more employees at the rate of $10 or more. We simply cannot absorb 5,000 highly skilled and trained workers in our community. As you heard yesterday from Senator Feinstein, the direct and indirect loss of jobs, as I've stated, is going to be 26,000 jobs. That translates for Napa and Solano County into an unemployment rate of 22%. That's more than 1 in 5 people out of work in 2 relatively small counties in the state of California. Again, we can't handle this type of an economic impact. The Vallejo rate of unemployment alone, and we are 10.7 right now, will go to as high as 33%. That's 1 in 3 in our community. And again, I want to go back to the fact that Mare Island is the heart of our community. It has been for 140 years. These numbers translate to people whose way of life will be forever altered by the closure of Mare Island. This closure is definitely not for the common good, nor does it appear to be in the country's interest either. We've heard your comments as we've listened to the testimony on prior hearings. We've heard the comments about the NIMBY syndrome, not in my backyard. But commissioners, you must consider our economic impact presentation within the context that you have it within your power to save the United States several $billion by keeping Mare Island open while avoiding economic hardship in our community. And I want to just summarize how you can do that. You saw with your own eyes that huge industrial military complex last Saturday that has a value of $1.7 billion. You heard testimony here today that the closure costs, by our estimates, are an additional $1 billion. That nearly is $3 billion that you can save the United States people and the country and our country. Let me add further to that if this yard closes, you will cost, or potentially cost, the country of America potentially many billions of dollars, in that you have lost the only shipyard that can keep the cost down at the private yards. In the past 10 years, we have been asked, as you've heard, to bid new construction jobs. We didn't get it. But I remember when Captain Scheider, the shipyard commander, specifically was preparing the bids that were going back to Washington, and he thought, and we thought, we were going to get that new construction. Well, what happened? It was used to drive down the private yards. Now, everybody won on that, except perhaps our community. But you're going to lose that capability. If you lose that capability and you become totally dependent on private yards, we're going to have a problem. Thank you very much. Congressman Miller.
Thank you. Thank you to the entire panel. As you already know, members of the commission, this has been and will continue to be a very long process for you between now and the time that you have to make a decision in July. And we recognize that you have already heard, and you will continue to hear from other bases and yards, that the Navy's analysis is seriously flawed. But I would hope that rather than tire from that testimony, that you would in fact pay very, very close attention to it. Because I think it serves as a warning sign that the information that has been submitted to you and the criteria that has been established may in fact jeopardize this entire process. You are, and the Congress decided that you should be, the Court of Appeals in this process. And I would submit to you that the case to close Mare Island in fact deserves a new trial. The Navy has failed to meet its burden of proof to provide you the accurate and factual information necessary to carry out your mission. The Navy would have you, the Commission, believe that it is in the best interest of this nation to take its most modern and technologically advanced yard and simply disassemble it. The case for that cannot be sustained on the merits, and instead what we have seen submitted to you is a matrix that does not support the facts as we know them. It simply supports the decision of the Navy. Those of you who visited our yard on Saturday now know what we have known for some time. And that is that the reality of the Navy Yard at Mare Island is far different than the matrix that has been submitted to you. How do you know that? Because when you toured our yard, you saw our capability and to dry dock 2 cruisers simultaneously in dry docks number 2 and 3, and yet that capability is not credited to Mare Island on this matrix. You saw our capability to refuel 688 submarines, and yet, and in fact you witnessed one, that capability is not properly credited on this matrix to Mare Island. You were briefed and told about our ocean engineering complex, its importance to the future of the Navy, and yet it is not on the matrix. That would be the same as if the closure was recommended of Cape Canaveral, but they left off the fact that it launches the space shuttle. More importantly, through the pipe shops and through the engineering facilities, to see the dry docks and the pumping houses, to look at our forge and our press capabilities and the incredible modernization that has taken place with respect to that capabilities. As you were told about our ocean engineering, you started to hear phrases over and over again as people talked to you, as the tour leaders discussed it with you. You heard phrases such as, nowhere else on the West Coast, nowhere else in the Navy, nowhere else in the entire military. And with respect to some of the capabilities of Mare Island, you in fact heard nowhere else in the United States, either in the public or the private sector, as you were told about the capabilities that you witnessed. What does that tell us? That tells us this, that the word unique clearly and aptly applies to the shipyard facilities at Mare Island. It tells us that closing Mare Island will not end the need for these very unique and capable services. In fact, what it tells you, and what we have demonstrated to you to hear today, and will demonstrate in the coming weeks, is that in fact you will be required to spend, or the taxpayers of this nation will be required to expend hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe exceeding $1 billion, simply to reconstruct the capacity that already is in place at Mare Island. By the same token, on the corrected matrix, and we've only corrected those facts for which we have firsthand knowledge, on the corrected matrix, the number of the yards below us could be closed in their entirety, and Mare Island could in fact absorb them with current capacity and never miss a beat. We could in fact absorb that capacity with no new construction in support of our yards, or no new construction in support of our families and the workforce necessary to do that. But the Navy decided some time ago the capacity was going to be the argument after dispersal wasn't and home port wasn't working, that now capacity would be the decision. And so Mare Island started to lose that ability to work at the Navy's direction. And so you're put in the position of it being at the confluence, if you will, of a terribly inaccurate matrix, the basis on which the decision is supposed to be made, and the unique capabilities of Mare Island. When the Congress passed this legislation to create the Base Closure Commission, legislation that I supported, we did so knowing this, that we had to charge somebody, and in this case it's you. This argument was used so often, that we could not rely on the military nor the Congress to make these decisions, because we wouldn't get an impartial review and a determination. We charged you, this commission, with making those decisions. You should be forewarned this morning by this testimony and testimony you'll hear later today about Alameda, that something is terribly, terribly wrong in this matrix. Something is terribly wrong when one part of the equation can only be demonstrated in terms of the impacts on the closed facility, but nowhere do we find the cost being laid out for the relocation, whether it's the carriers at Alameda, the 688 capacity, the dry dock capacity, or ocean engineering. Is that laid out to this commission? You must ask those questions on behalf of the Congress of the United States, the people of the United States, and the President of the United States, to whom you will submit this report. We think we've made that case. We think the Navy has failed in its burden, and we look forward to answering any questions that you may have. Thank you very much for your time and your consideration and your thoughtfulness. If we could have cooperation here, it's our time.
I actually want to thank the audience for their forbearance. They've been a real help in this process, so thank you. And I wanted to at least permit you that opportunity, because it was, in fact, a very professional presentation by the entire panel, and their input will help us in sifting through a very complex situation. I have one question, and Congressman Miller, maybe you can answer it, or perhaps Mr. Kelly can, and that's the following, and it's maybe a difficult one that you may want to submit your real recommendations in writing. I understand your pitch today. I understand you're challenging the numbers with regard to the cost of closure, the cost of relocation, of some of these important facilities, the uniqueness of some of these facilities. I understand your argument that critical errors were made in the matrix determining military value, and therefore, according to your calculations, you should have a rating of 43.8 in essence, or 44 rather than the 38 that you were given. Let's just assume that you prevail on your analysis of the matrix errors, the cost of closure, the cost of relocation. This commission is still faced with the very difficult task of downsizing. We all know that, in essence, we have, too many homes. We're house poor, and we can't afford to have empty facilities or facilities used at 20 and 30 or 40% capacity. Based on your feel, based on your recommendations, where would you suggest we go in order to take off the board the excess capacity? Do you want to take a shot at that?
Sure, I'll answer the question. The way you answer that question is you go back to the process that Navy used. We're not going to question the design of the process here. Just go fix the flaws in the process, rerun the analysis, and then find out how it comes out. Now, we're not suggesting that we found all the errors in capacity because we don't know what other yards did. We aren't suggesting that we found all of the problems with the military value analysis, nor with the COBRA analysis, but we do know that in every single case they're seriously flawed. My suggestion is go back to Navy, make them get it right, and however it comes out, it comes out.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen of the panel.
Mr. Chairman, let me say that Congressman Miller is absolutely right. When this legislation was passed, the Congress decided that they wanted another body to make these deliberations. And I think, as you know, we all are agonizing with making the right decisions. By this time next week, we will have visited Charleston, South Carolina, and I'm sure we will have a very similar discussion on the merits of their yard and why they're scoring. And I think that brings us to the point, Mr. Kelly, you were making, and that is the data that you submitted. You submitted data for your yard in its capability using how many shifts?
3 shifts per day.
3 shifts per day. There's no question that we're going to be asking our research and analysis staff to find out what data the other yards submitted. Are we looking realistically at building to a 3-shift-a-day yard capacity? Are we looking at keeping it at 1 shift or possibly 2 shifts for the ramp-up capability of the 3 shifts if we need to find that in a future time frame? So those are the kind of things that I am going to be looking at from the Navy.
If I might add to that, the data that was submitted for Mare Island was based on 3-shift-per-day manning and 10% overtime. That's the normal structure for achieving the maximum work with the shipyard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep. I have a couple of comments and a couple of questions, so I'll try to be very brief. It's obvious that not all, but many of the cost and capacity corrections for Mare Island might well apply to other naval shipyards. Do you agree with that? Yeah, okay.
Well, no, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with respect to the 688 refueling capacity. Mare Island has it. It's going to be replicated, and I don't agree with respect to
I understand that it's certainly not all. Just some of. Let me rephrase.
Maybe
some
we don't have any knowledge of.
Secondly, this revised military matrix really needs to, in order to have its maximum validity, needs to have the corrections entered for the other naval shipyards also.
Absolutely correct.
Yeah, I just want to bring these points out. Okay.
I think what we're trying to encourage there, obviously, is that process. Because I think you will hear as you visit the other yards that there are mistakes there. It must be a corrected process upon which the determination is made. It must be corrected.
I understand that, and I'm just trying to say that the very strong and cogent arguments that you raised apply to some of the other facilities as well. Not just naval shipyards, as a matter of fact.
Yes, there may be capabilities we are unaware of.
Right. It's pretty clear, at least to me, that Navy's position at Hunters Point number 4 is that it will not be certified or recertified. Is that a true statement?
That is Navy's position, and I would not want you to think that we entered that capability into this corrected matrix. We did not. We're just simply, again, showed that to point out how ludicrous it is to give Long Beach credit for something they can't do while not awarding us credit for something we've done.
My next question is, what is Navy's intent or plan for Long Beach? Is it to have shipyard personnel from Puget Sound or some other facility come when a nuclear vessel is docked at Long Beach, or do you not know?
I don't know. What they did was they simply gave Long Beach credit for that capability. As you probably know, I'm sure the plan is that some nuclear-capable shipyard would come and do the work rather than try and license that shipyard.
Yeah, those are the only two possibilities, and I think you're correct in what you assume. But it's interesting to me that no statement has been made on that plan, if one exists. Okay. My final statement or question rather is does Navy have a naval shipyard strategy, or does it appear to you that based on this, as you have pointed out, flawed model? I mean, there's more things we can ask about the model than you've discussed, but does Navy seem to have a naval shipyard philosophy or strategy? Is Pearl Harbor saved because it was strategically located?
Within their analysis, the reason that Pearl Harbor was saved was simply as it didn't come out on the bottom of the analysis due to the military values that were assigned and whatnot. If the process is rerun, I have no doubt Pearl Harbor would fall out as one that would be targeted. With respect to, does Navy have a strategy? In 1991, the strategy was don't close any. In 1993, it appears to be close Mare Island. And the analysis that they provided supports it, but the analysis is flawed. We really don't know, other than what they provided to the Commission.
Again, I think that's one of our tenets, because clearly the question is whether capacity disqualifies you or whether the strategy should be, as Mr. Kelly pointed out, the assembling of the best capacity at the best price and the best service to the Navy. The yards below us are much weaker in terms of the functions, the range of functions that they can provide to the Navy. And as we pointed out, the functions at Mare Island, a huge amount of money will be spent to recreate those either at those yards or somewhere else. Pearl Harbor is not a major shipyard facility. It's a major military installation, but a shipyard is not a major facility. Long Beach has some questions. The other point being that when you go to of course, Long Beach isn't on the books here, but those are aging facilities. What you see at Mare Island, of course, and you have personal experience, is the fact that a huge amount of money has been invested over the last decade to keep this facility modern, up to date. There is no deferred maintenance at this yard. So either you got to recreate new capacity somewhere else, or you're going to spend a lot of time dealing with deferred maintenance because those were not major yards.
Right. Thank you.
Let me have it, Jim.
Yeah, sure.
Let me address this to Mr. Christensen or Mr. Kelly. I think any of us who was on that trip a couple of days ago all of us were tremendously impressed by what we saw, not just the machines and the investment, but the sense of history that the United States has in Mare Island. 150 years of having Mare Island as our principal naval shipyard on the West Coast. If you take everything you just said, Congressman Miller, about the quality of Mare Island, and I'm prepared to grant it, if you take all the modernization that has already taken place, the investment the Navy has in it, the ocean engineering project, those million-dollar pieces of equipment, excellent workers. You take all of that, how come Mare Island got downsized over the years? Why has the Navy been steering business elsewhere?
Well, again, you can only speculate in these matters, but Mare Island has been losing business as part of what appears to us to have simply been a trend to close down the Bay Area for quite some time, preceding the deliberations of the Navy's Base Structure and Evaluation Committee. Now, some of us are not naive. I mean, there are jungle drums in Navy circuit, and we've been told for quite some time we're in trouble. We're in trouble because we don't enjoy some of the political support maybe maybe Navy thinks we should. We don't know. But the fact is that this plan, or this downsizing of Mare Island, has sort of become a self-fulfilling prophecy over the last 4 years. You just keep taking work away, and at some point, then the Navy asks the question, as they did here, what work have we assigned you, and starts awarding credit based on that. We don't get much credit if you haven't been assigned a lot of work.
Right. Well, if I can read the odious words of the DOD, of the Pentagon, as they submitted this to us, it might reflect at least what they had in mind, and I don't think it has anything to do with political capacity or heft to get business there, at least what they say it says. First of all, everybody recognizes that we got too much shipyard capacity on both coasts. I think everybody acknowledges that. I haven't met anybody yet who said we need to build more, or we really need all the shipyards that we have. So something's got to give in all of this, or otherwise we keep open facilities that we shouldn't, and which starves other things to an extent. As somebody at Caltech would say, this is a zero-sum game. If you spend it here, you don't spend it elsewhere. And so we have to try to pick on the basis of data given to us by the Navy, overseen by the General Accounting Office, and very much on the basis of what you've provided to us, and all of which we will show the Navy and ask them to prove that their data is right and yours is not right. But here's what they say. Mare Island has the lowest military value of those shipyards supporting the Pacific Fleet. Now, obviously, your chart does not support that. And its workload can be readily absorbed by the remaining yards which possess higher military value. The closure of Mare Island Naval Shipyard, in combination with the Charleston Naval Shipyard, allows the elimination of the greater amount of excess capacity. That is, if you close those two, while maintaining the overall value of the remaining shipyard at a higher military value level than that of the current configuration of shipyards. Other options considered, if you pick Pearl Harbor or Long Beach or whatever, either reduced capacity below that required to support the approved force levels, comma, eliminated specific capabilities needed to support mission requirements, or resulted in a lower military value for this group of activities. Now that's what the Navy says. We've got here is a fight about facts, and I think this is not a case, I take it, where we're arguing about which facts to weigh. This is one about simply who's got the better case on the basis of facts, and we'll have to take what you've given to us in your excellent presentation and ask the Navy to disprove it, to show that they are right and you are wrong, and that's really what it's going to come down to.
If I might, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner McPherson, I'd like to add a few comments. We're still being used for competitive bidding. That's not in your report. You've got to consider that. You've got to consider what's going to happen to our country and our defense when you don't have that capability. That's not in your report. And I just ask you, from a layman's standpoint, to consider that in your deliberations. Thank you.
I'd also like to comment. With respect to your question, I agree with you. This is an argument about facts, but there is one exception. The exception is if the military value matrix itself doesn't cover all the facts. It doesn't cover ocean engineering, for instance. That program is one of the highest priorities in the military, and as the Congressman pointed out, to exclude it is just ridiculous. So other than those unique capabilities, yes, the argument is about the facts. I also would like to correct a statement that I made. There was a Navy perception that we lacked political support. We know we have political support.
You bet you do. And we know you do also. We have received that, and we know how effective it is. One observation or a statement that I'd like to make, and that is, and I'm not suggesting that other testimony we have heard heretofore, that which we're going to hear after, violates this, but I really must say that the testimony that we heard today is, number one, helpful, and number two, you pointed out things where we ourselves have questioned the Navy. So it's not that you tried to, turn the water into wine. I mean, the areas where there's a problem, we know there's a problem, and we will in fact go back to the Navy and try to come up with what the real accurate data is, who's right on the facts, and of course we have to, and we will, look at the other evaluations with respect to potential competing facilities. And I know what's going to happen. They'll throw up a chart that'll be different from yours, but we have to make the judgment as to who really is correct. But I want to thank you. Does anybody else on the panel have any?
I have one more.
Yeah.
Just to pick up on something else you said. In answer to my question, you talked about the Navy's kind of long-term apparent inclination to downsize the Bay Area. To what extent is Mare Island dependent on what is done with the rest of the Bay Area, and to what degree is it independent of that?
Well, Mare Island is essentially self-sufficient, and because our workload, shipyard workload, is planned approximately years in advance, not too dependent. I'd say the only correlation really on the rest of the Bay Area is, of course, Mare Island can go down to Alameda and do nuclear work on carriers there and do it without travel expenses. Were those ships to be based somewhere else, well then somebody's going to be paying travel expenses. For instance, the Everett base up in Washington. But other than that, as a shipyard, our work typically comes to us, or we go to the work.
Mr. Chairman,
yes.
I have one final question. Is there any interfacing or any jointness between Mare Island and the Naval Weapons Station at Concord, which stays open? I noticed that in the recommendations, the housing at Mare Island will be utilized by the Navy at Concord. Is there any other interchange between those two?
I'd like to answer that. There's a rather large interrelationship. Right now, the Concord Naval Weapons Station utilizes a large portion of the southern half of the yard, and Mare Island also provides services to them. When the shipyard closes, the facilities they're using are going to have to be replicated at a cost of about $50 million wherever they go. But right now, in addition, the ships which are home ported at Concord really berth at Mare Island. They do not berth at Concord. And the family support is at Mare Island. So there's quite a relationship between the Naval Weapons Station at Concord and Mare Island.
I just want to reiterate the outstanding presentation that the panelists gave. There's a lot of preparation you obviously put into it, and you came across as very honest and fair, and I very much appreciate that. It's one of the better presentations that I've personally seen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.